Professor Moshe Vardi. Moshe is a university professor of computational engineering at Rice University. And his fields include automated reasoning, AI, machine learning, database theory, multi-agent systems, and more, really very broad scope. His education is from the MSc and the PhD from here, from the Hebrew University. His awards is, again, a long list, and we are short of time, but he's a winner of 3 outstanding innovation awards from IBM, the ACM Gödel Prize, ACM other awards, and I'll cut with this and just read out his title, Humans, Machines, and Work, the Future is Now. Moshe.
Toda rabba, thank you very much. So the theme of this symposium is computer science impact on society. And it somehow happened with all the talks so far, and I think also maybe all the talks tomorrow, the impact is always positive. Everything is great. Everything is wonderful. And I want to be the party pooper, because if you read the paper, you get a very different impression. AI today is a scary word. Algorithm is a scary word. So we need to kind of be more aware of our impact on society, and I'll focus on one aspect, which is the impact on labor. So we heard yesterday about the prospects of automated driving. This is a kind of almost a wet dream for many people in AI. On one hand, I mean, there is a just huge commercial interest in this area. We heard Amnon. There are hundreds of companies who are doing different parts of it, all the way from technology company, car company, many startups. Some people talk about the market in many trillions of dollars. Amnon was optimistic. I would say he didn't mention a number, but you listen to him, I would say it will happen in 5 years. Other people talk about maybe 25 years. It's going to be a huge issue. It's going to be a major, major impact or industrial impact, even to the point that people are wondering where are we going to get organ for transplantation, okay? Because today, if you need a liver, you need to get it from someone who's going to get killed in a car crash. What happened when we eliminate 95% of car crashes? But on the other hand, we're going to save maybe millions of people a year. But I want to focus on another aspect, which is you look at the United States and you look at this diagram, and this is a few years old, but this has not changed significantly. The most common job in every state is a truck driver. This is true for the majority of the states in the United States. So it turns out that there are indeed millions of people who are driving for a living. People whose title is a driver, truck or taxi, or all the gig drivers. We're talking close to about 5 million people. If you look at many other people whose real job, if you're a postal worker, most of what you do is you drive around. And so now we are talking about 15 million people who really drive for a living. And if you automate driving, you can automate the whole, you can see that you can automate the whole logistical supply chain. Warehouses are largely being automated. Ports are being automated. Cargo ships are much easier to automate than cars because you don't have to worry about merging, changing lanes, for example. So we're talking about massive loss of jobs mostly for working class people. And the question is what will happen to them? And economists will tell you, well, they'll find other jobs. But this is really a debate between kind of two schools, if you want, in economics. And the dominant approach is the so-called neoclassical approach, and Ken Rogoff from Harvard is a representative of that approach, and he says, well, people have been threatened with mass unemployment from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It never happened, it will never happen, we don't have to worry about it, even though he does talk about a long period of painful adjustment. Well, how long? He doesn't say. How painful? He doesn't say. So we'll come back to this point. But people like him bring us this, for example, this is a chart of unemployment, the unemployment rate over the past 50 years. And you see, of course, whenever there is a recession, these are the dark bars are recession. It goes up in a recession, but we are now, closer to the lowest we have been now in 50 years. So you see, there's no unemployment, even though, of course, we have been automated massively during this period. So there's nothing to worry about according to this approach in economics. But then you have other distinguished economics like Paul Krugman, who say can innovation and progress really hurt large number of workers, maybe even workers in general? The truth that it can, and serious economists have been aware of this possibility for almost 2 centuries. So there is a debate, two poles of this spectrum. And if you want the new Luddite, I say this time may be different. And the new classical said, no, why should it be different this time? And it's very hard to say who is right, because the future is unknown. And this is now a matter of intense interest, and every few months you see a new report coming out from a consulting company or from some university or some OECD. And so there are lots of reports on these topics. And last year, Technology Review decided to do some kind of consensus of all these studies and find out that they are just all over the map. And the conclusion was there are about as many opinions as there are experts. So many, many studies, each one of them coming with a different prediction. Now, why is that? So there is a Danish phrase that says predictions are difficult, especially about the future. But I think the Danes got it wrong. Predictions are easy, especially about the future, because everybody here can make a prediction. And if you say what will happen in 30 years, it's going to be very hard to come 30 years later and find out whether you're right or wrong. What's difficult to make is correct predictions. So I'm not going to make any prediction. I don't have any crystal ball to the future. But I'm going to talk about the past, because I think the past is our best guidance for what is happening, what will happen. And I'm going to focus on US manufacturing as a test case. Why is US manufacturing? First of all, US economy is a huge economy. It's about 25% of the world GDP. Okay? The world roughly GDP is about $80 trillion. US is about $20 trillion. Manufacturing, you may not, you won't believe it if you just listen to Donald Trump, but it's the largest sector of the US economy. It is almost twice as big as the next sector, which is government. It's still the largest sector in the US economy. In fact, if you look at the US, it is about the size of Germany, Korea, France, Russia, Brazil, and UK combined. China is bigger, but the US is just a manufacturing giant. Now here is one plot that summarizes what happened to US manufacturing over the past 50 years. So there are 2 lines here that were put on top of each other. And one is manufacturing volume. This is net added value in constant dollar. And you can see that it's just growing. It's been growing. Of course, it zigzags. You can see the recessions. But we are now close to, approaching $2.5 trillion a year. On the other hand, here you see employment. And you see that employment peaked in 1980, and it's been going down since then. Again, here you see the recession, the recovery, but we are still somewhere just above 12 million workers. That means that we have lost about 7.5, about 1/3 of workers we have lost just roughly of the past 30 to 40 years. Now what happened? How come we are manufacturing more with fewer workers? The answer is very simple. It's all about productivity. And in fact, if you see, you'll see that if you look at manufacturing share of the GDP as a part of the economy, you see it's about constant. It's about just above it, around 12% now for 50, 60 years. It's just the workforce has been declining. It used to be 25%, now it's below 10%. In fact, you go back, you'll find it used to be about 40%. And it's just been declining now for 50 years. And it's been declining because productivity is increasing. Productivity increasing. This is employment, and this is manufacturing share of the economy.
The black line is general employment?
The black line is just interpolation. It's just linear line interpolates it, yeah. It's just to show you that it's really declining linearly. It's zigzagging around.
Interesting to see general employment.
General employment usually goes up. General employment usually goes up as part of the population. But I'll come back because you have to define employment, and I'll come back to this point in a minute. So productivity has been effectively, if you just look even between already over a period of 15 years, you see the productivity has doubled because of automation. So we are able to make more with fewer workers. And so now we said, okay, so manufacturing is a good test case. There has been massive automation. If you want to see what does a modern, for example, car factory looks like, go into YouTube and type like a Tesla Model S, and you'll see a fully automated, beautiful videos humming along. In fact, these are called dark factory floor because they turn the light on only to take pictures. Because otherwise, there is no need to keep the lights on. The robots can do the work in the dark. So what has happened? This is what's happening. The question is, how well did things work out for all these people who lost their jobs? And the phenomenon that I'm going to talk about is called the great decoupling. Why is it called the great decoupling? Because if you look at 4 economic indicators, which is productivity, which is what drives economic growth, and then GDP, and private jobs, and median income, you see there was a period of about 30 years, roughly the end of the war, but 40 years after World War II, where everything was humming along. Productivity grew, and the economy grew, and jobs were generated, and income rose, and you almost look like the fact that these 4 numbers should go together look like an economic law, and economists concluded all we have to worry is about productivity, and everything will take care of itself afterwards. Except that it didn't. So something happened around 1980, and you see that productivity continued to grow, and GDP continued to grow, but we are creating fewer jobs, and income has stagnated. So you can still grow the economy, but it doesn't mean necessarily that workers are going to benefit from it. And now I'm going to show you some data what happened to workers. For example, this is real median, real means real and constant mean the same thing. It means constant dollars. This look at median yearly income, white men with no college degree. These are working class men. These are white working class men. And what you can see here, that their income has declined in real terms over a period of 40 years. Again, this is the recession. There is some improvement, but we are still below where we were in 1975. And if you want to understand politics in the United States, this is it. If you see rallies and you see white men shaking their fist in these political rallies, and we used to see kind of angry men shaking their fist usually in the Middle East, death to America, death to Israel, and now you see this kind of angry men in America, and you wonder why are they so angry? Well, that is why they're angry, because they have an acute sense that they are falling behind while the economy around them is booming. Now, we've seen before the great job boom, and how unemployment is historically low. But here is the fact. Unemployment, the way it is measured, has been defined out of relevance by politicians. There is tremendous pressure on labor statistics, on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to change the definition of what is unemployment. Unemployment measures how many people who are looking for a job, actively looking for a job, are finding some job. You find 1 hour a week job, you're not unemployed anymore. So a much more meaningful measure for labor economists is labor force participation, and it looks how many people are either working or looking for a job. Now this looks at men. Why men? Because this looks at 50 years, and you can imagine the picture for women would be quite different because first of all in the 1960s they would be entering the workforce. So this focuses on men, ages 25 to 54. So the idea is that usually they are done with school and it's way too early for them to retire. And what you see here is a decline, and again, you see the zigzag of recession. Overall, you see a decline over the last 50 years. And this decline is even more precipitous when you take education into account. So if you look at people that have a bachelor degree or more, there's been some decline, but not too significant in some sense. But look what happened with those that have high school degree or less. And you see there was just, these people used to be, labor participation used to be around 97%. This is what men used to do. They used to work and provide. And now we are at 82%, around 82%. And what it means, if you think about it, now there also you have to understand that these are people, not all of these people are working. Some of them are unemployed. And it means that somewhere between maybe even more than 1 in 5 working class men are not working. It's an irony, right? Working class men, but they are not working. And when a society has such a large number of men who are not working, it's a societal crisis. I mean, social scientists talk about it as a calamity with huge societal consequences. For example, we can talk a long time, just the people talk about the marriage gap. What you see are people whose college degree gets married. People with high school education gets married less and less because the men don't have a job, so they're not attractive mates. So now this is all kind of this story, what is happening, but we need to zoom in to understand why it is happening. Because at the same time, many people say, look, there are all these great jobs, website designer, and e-commerce consultant, and on and on and on. So the answer is, of course, it depends on what place of the skill spectrum you are. So this is what labor economists call the skill spectrum, and you can think of them, this is high salary, and this is low salary. So, and this is whether jobs are created above zero, that means we're creating jobs, or jobs are destroyed. So what happened? At the high end, there are lots of good jobs. I mean, this technology creates lots of interesting jobs. There are well-paying jobs. So the people who have the right skill, high skill, usually college degree and above, they're doing quite well. What happened at the low end? So despite of what we heard from Sarit yesterday, today building a robot that can operate in a house, this is very difficult. Short of the Roomba that can walk around and clean the floor, just to think of the robot that will wash dishes. Just put the dishes even in the dishwasher. Think of the work of what we call the people who just clean table in a restaurant. Okay? If you're a roboticist, tell me if you can build such a robot just to clean tables in a restaurant. And the people who clean table in a restaurant, you pay the minimum wage. So there's no economic, first of all, it's very, very difficult technically, and there's no economic incentive to automate this. So at the very low end, we create jobs. At the high end, we create jobs. Where do we lose jobs? In the middle of the skill spectrum, because these are jobs that pay more. If you look at people who used to work in American industry, they are paid $20 to $30 an hour. That's $50,000 to $60,000 a year. And a robot, if you can now deploy an industrial robot, where the marginal cost is less than $20 a year, you're going to deploy robots. At the same time, the capabilities of robots have increased. That's where we're automating. People have analyzed what happened to this trough over time. The answer is it gets wider and it moves to the right. Over time, what's considered a routine job is moving up the skill spectrum. Here's another way to look at it. And this look takes the whole pie of the jobs and divide them into low skill, middle skill, and high skill. And you can see that this is 1983, and you can see that almost 60% of the jobs are called middle skill. We had a piece of high skill and a piece of low skill. Now you go to 2012, low skill has increased a little bit, high skill has increased quite a lot, there are more jobs at the high skill, and it's the middle skill that shrinks. And so it's not as if, it's not a uniform picture of what technology is doing to the labor force. It depends where you are, and where we have seen the big losses are in the middle skill jobs that used to pay quite well. Quite well, relatively speaking, of course. So you can see what the impact on this is, for example, in terms of compensations, income, real hourly wages. If you have an advanced degree, that is post-baccalaureate degree, then this is from 73 till even 2006, you see that you've done quite well. College degree has done well. If you have only some college would mean maybe 2 years associate degree, you kept up. But if you have high school or less, you fell behind. Just to understand, about 1/3 of the population has a 4-year college degree, about 1/3 has some college, and about 1/3 high school or less. So you see that high school or less have lost ground, some college barely kept with inflation, and it's college and post-baccalaureate that have done quite well. Now, this does not, I've kind of put these two things together, and this suggests that automation is responsible for what we've seen in the decline of middle class and working class people. But I have not shown any causality here. And it's very hard to establish causality on big picture like this, because we can run experiments in economics, or definitely not at the macro level. So about 5 years ago, when there was a major poll by the Pew Charitable Trust, there was big disagreement. There was about 40% of economists polled did agree that technology and automation are a central reason why median wages have been stagnant. But 30% were uncertain, and 28% disagreed. This was 5 years ago. And then in 2017, a study came out that looked at urban area and looked at the again, correlation between deployments of industrial robots and decline in employment. And that data was considered by many economists to be compelling, because you see that the more robots have been deployed, the more jobs have been lost. And already by last year, 2 years ago, Laura Tyson used to chair the Council of Economic Advisors for President Clinton, I believe. She already said, this debate is over. Among economists, the consensus is that about 80% of the loss in US manufacturing jobs of the last 3 decades was the result of labor saving and productivity enhancing technological change, with trade coming a distant second. Why do we hear so much people talking about trade? Because automation is an abstract force, and trade is a much more concrete. It's other countries, other people, especially if they look differently than you. It's much easier to scapegoat them than talk about automation. Now I have to say that some economists, to me, I'm puzzled by this position that still denies it. So James Beeson, I think, is from Boston College, and he says no, and he has an argument why automation cannot cause loss of jobs. And he says if you automate, productivity increases, prices will go down, demand will go up, and jobs will be created. And I think this is just bad economics, because you have to worry about the efficiency of the labor market, what's called rigidity, elasticity. There are all kinds of things that do not tell you just because prices go down, employment is necessarily going up and match up with it. So this is I think, it's just really better. Some people call this approach economism rather than economics. So, but if we take the historical pictures, then you say, well, in some sense, technology has been destroying jobs for thousands of years. So what's different this time? I think many of us have a sense that robots, machines became faster than us and stronger than us, but we always were smarter than them. And now there is kind of a sense we are losing this particular edge. We're not there quite yet there, but there are people who do research on AI, and that's what they're trying to do, is to create machines. Now we're doing it right now task by task. This idea of artificial general intelligence is very far from us. But we saw where Amnon was telling us, we're going to do this task, and we can do it in maybe 5 years. And the progress over the past 10 years has been utterly dramatic. If you look at AI today and the way it was like in 2010, just has been dramatically changed. So what happens if we are successful in this quest for building artificial intelligent machine? And we have to take into consideration the possibility of so-called tipping point. So the concept of tipping point, physicists will call it phase transition, is something that Malcolm Gladwell popularized in a book in this name in 2005, where suddenly there is a societal change, a quantitative change lead to qualitative change. So imagine you're an economist, and the year is 1700, and somebody is asking you to make a prediction for economic growth in the next 100 years. So you're going to look back. Imagine you have economic data for the previous 2,000 years, and you see the economic growth was at most 0.1% per year. So you said, well, that's what I predict. It's going to continue to grow 0.1% per year. But of course, in the middle of the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution happened, and we went on an exponential curve. And today we are just infinitely richer because of the Industrial Revolution. So technology can push into a certain tipping point. And this was put in a very nice parable, the parable of the neoclassical horses by Vasily Leontiev, a Nobel Prize winning economist, who talked about two horses who were having a conversation in around 1910. And one horse heard about the Ford Model T, and that horse is very concerned. And he says, look, what will people do? What will horses do now that there are cars? Who needs us anymore? And this is the Luddite horse. And the neoclassical horse has nothing to worry about, he said. Technology always destroys jobs for horses, but it creates new jobs for horses, jobs we cannot even imagine yet. Who was right? Well, we have now the hindsight of about 100 years, and we know that equine population in the United States peaked around 1915, and it's been going down since then, and there are no more jobs for horses. Horses are just pets.
Did you say the white men are horses?
You said it. So the point is, there was a phase transition, and there was the introduction of automobile, and from horses' point of view, that's it. There are no more jobs for horses. Now, what about the Industrial Revolution? It did happen, and we seem to be okay. We're infinitely rich, richer than people were 300 years ago, and this is very true. But if you think that this was easy, then go back and learn history. It was long, slow, and agonizing. It took us 200 years to adapt to the Industrial Revolution. It really was the emergence of the modern social welfare state that I would put it essentially in the 2 decades post-World War II, where we have finally learned to cope with the Industrial Revolution. We had 2 communist revolutions. The death toll is estimated about 100 million people. So if we are going to repeat the same experience without learning for it, shame on us. So yes, technology creates new jobs, and technology destroys jobs. What's the relation between these two? The answer is it's very difficult to predict. Will the numbers, will we create enough new jobs? Will we create them at the right pace? What about the skill level? So there is a project in West Virginia called Miners to Coders. And I heard a beautiful lecture how you take miners and you retrain them as coders. And it was really heartwarming. And I had a question at the end. How many miners have you been able to train like that? So the answer was 50. I said, 50? They said, no, 15. So they were able to train 15 miners to become coders. But of course, the answer, there are thousands and thousands of unemployed miners. So 15 miners who are becoming coders is utterly, it's a nice little story with no global significance whatsoever. If you take a truck driver whose job has been automated away, and you tell them, good news for you, we can send you to school to learn to become a software engineer to develop code for automated trucks. Yeah, I'm sure you can find some truck drivers that can make the transition, but generally it's not going to work. There are even issue of where are the jobs. So right now, there are probably lots of jobs for, let's say, solar panel installers in the Bay Area in California. And you can see, you can take the miners from West Virginia and move them to California. They can't afford to move. It's just way too expensive there. And probably the houses in West Virginia never recovered from the Great Recession. So there are complexity, and that's what I talked before about the efficiency or the rigidity of the labor market. This was a report from the World Economic Forum about all the new jobs that AI will create. It's an amazing list because I don't even know myself. I don't know what is a worldview trainer or a transparency analyst. But I can tell you none of these jobs is jobs for people with high school education. So it's not enough to talk about all the jobs are created at the higher of the spectrum, of the skill spectrum. We have to worry about what happened to people who do not have the right skills. Oh, here's another one. Oren Nessioni, a very distinguished AI researcher, and he published a Wired magazine article about 2 years ago, and he has a solution. The population is getting older. We need lots of people who work in caregiving. So all these people who lost their job in manufacturing, they should become caregivers. And that's very nice to do, to sit down in an air-conditioned office in Seattle. But it turns out it's not so simple. Most of these manufacturing workers are men. their identity is that of people who do physical work. They don't see themselves as people who are caregivers. Even if they make the transitions, it's not clear that they will be hired. If they go to a nursing home and say, I'm willing to work here, it's not clear that they will be hired there. There is a cultural gap. These jobs are considered pink-collar jobs. We can nod our head and say, no, we should not be so biased. But people are not widgets, and they cannot be easily moved from one kind of job to another kind of jobs. Even the number of jobs. If you go back, now, of course, Silicon Valley is the center of American industry in some sense. But people forget, 50 years ago, it was Detroit. You can go back to Detroit in 1990, and you look at the three car manufacturers. They had a market cap in real dollar of $65 billion, and they employed more than 1 million people. Today, you go to Silicon Valley, and you take a look at the large tech companies, and they have a market cap around $2 trillion, and they employ fewer than 200,000 workers. So the numbers, they've created a hugely successful industry, but they can do it with order of magnitude, a smaller number of workers. Now, interestingly, in 2016, we had election. Nobody talked about automation. Hillary Clinton didn't talk about automation. Bernie Sanders didn't talk about automation. Of course, Trump didn't talk about automation. In fact, the only politician who was talking about automation was Barack Obama, who was not running for any office at that point. But this is shortly before that. This is just in June of 2016. And he says, yes, we have a problem. Manufacturing requires fewer and fewer workers. These people, if best, they're going to move to services. Services pay about half of what you get in manufacturing. So even if they find a job, they're not going to be happy. And he said, we have to re-examine the social compact. I'll come back to the social compact in a minute. This was 2016. What's happening now? Just a couple of weeks ago, Bill de Blasio, who's running he's one of the Democratic candidates. He's not going, I don't think he's going to make it. I don't think he made it to the third debate. But he put an op-ed on the issue of automation, why American workers need to be protected from automation. As president, I would issue a robotax for corporations displacing humans and create a federal agency to oversee automation. Andrew Yang, another candidate, and he's a young businessman, and his signature policy, he's calling the freedom dividend a form of universal basic income that would guarantee every American, 18 to 64, at least $1,000 a month. So what is the social compact that we're talking about? We have a whole set of rules today that govern how our working life, and we just take it for granted. But this is really the outcome of a sequence of reform that started in the middle of the 19th century. There was a great misery because of the Industrial Revolution. And everybody understands that if you don't want a revolution, then you have to do something to make life better for workers. And things that we take for granted, the right to strike, the right to unionize, abolish child labor, 40-hour work week, equal pay for women and minority, health and safety laws. Every step here was a huge fight because businesses always said this will increase the cost of labor and it will eliminate jobs. And it was a huge fight to make it happen. So now the debate is over universal basic income. That's the kind of the new kid of the block in terms of the social welfare. I don't think Andrew Yang is going to be elected. I don't think we're going to see soon a universal basic income. But it is not being seriously discussed. And it's the beginning of conversation that we badly need to have. Thank you very much. So growth of population has never been a problem because as the population grows, needs grow. So in fact, economy grows in two ways. Population grows and productivity grows. And growth of population has never been, usually employment simply grows with population. There are more people need more staff, more services. That's not been an issue. The other, maybe more impactful demographic change is the aging of the population. And so there are people like Rodney Brooks who says, I can't wait for these robots because who's going to take care of me when I'm old? And if you want another, in fact, demographic trend that some people expect is population to start decrease as we approach the later in the century. Generally, as countries approach certain level of wealth, reproduction slows down. So some people talk about what happened in a world where population actually decreases. And answer is there are too many variables and nobody really knows how all these are going to interact together.
Is income inequality a big factor in this equation?
It's a huge factor. I mean, and I had a whole segment. I give longer talks, and I talk at length about income inequality. I just had to cut it to fit it in the 40-minute format. But yes, inequality has been increasing, and partly because, again, what we saw with the skill spectrum is that the high end is doing well, and the middle is declining, and the low end, so the gap is growing, the middle class is shrinking, and you know, I mean, this is happening. I mean, economists kind of debate what are the reasons for that. Piketty just came up with another big book, What to Do. Elizabeth Warren talks about wealth tax. The interesting thing is actually the interesting trend in the United States are the growing number of billionaires who are getting more and more concerned. I said they're going to come after us with pitchforks. We better do something now. So there is a push from billionaires that we need to do some kind of reforms to deal with this income inequality. Gal.
I have a nagging suspicion of one of the rare people here who actually worked with robots. There's a number of flaws in what you're suggesting. This is not suggesting that I disagree with the overall trend, but I think it's not as dramatic as it seems. One of them is that there is an equation here. We're equating AI, progress in AI with robotics.
I said nothing like that. I'm sorry to disagree with you.
You know, the revolution in AI. The revolution in AI is happening in very specific areas.
Right.
It takes time for this, and it hasn't yet affected robotics to the degree that we think. It's mostly on the perception side. It's not happening on the decision-making side so much. There's a lot of issues there that are preventing robots from doing these things. There's another thing there, which is the analysis is based on equating skill with wages. But it's actually the lower wages jobs that are more difficult, very often more difficult to automate.
I'm sorry, where were you?
When you were doing the analysis with the Flat Valley? But the problem is, so it's the waiters that are difficult to automate. It's actually the lowest level paying jobs, which
Gal, you're repeating my points. I'm sorry to tell you. I made exactly the same point.
No, but what I'm saying is, once people shift, this is where the room also is for expansion. So when Warren Etzioni is talking about people should be becoming caregivers, and you're pointing out two problems with this. One is a cultural problem, and of course, the culture changes, but it takes time. And I agree completely, and it's actually a major problem. Okay. But the other issue there, that you're pointing out, is that the wages are very low. But what is happening is because we're having a hard time automating these things. I think I'm fine. Well, because we're having a hard time automating these things, the wages are going to be increasing. So we're facing a growing elderly population. The numbers of adults that are taking care of the elderly have dropped in the U.S. from 1 to 7 to 1 to 4, and it keeps dropping. The Israelis are not far behind. Japan is way, way below that. And all these jobs will be becoming high-paying jobs because it's very difficult to automate. We're nowhere near being able to do what a caregiver at home can do.
You could be right, but now you're talking about the future. But I'm telling you that so far there has been inexhaustible supplies of people who are willing to do these low-wage jobs, and there's been no, if you look, for example, take the minimum wage has not increased now in 50 years. So maybe at some point we will have a shortage and we will see the market responding, but so far it has not responded in that way.
And that's the other thing. So some of these minimum wages, so you know, typically robotics will tell you that.
Why don't you and I have a private conversation? Let's some other people. Yeah.
Many points we should continue on.
Yeah. Shafi?
I guess to me it's so obvious that I don't know if you're right or wrong about what's causing this problem for such a large uneducated population to lose jobs and lose income. But it's clear that the one conclusion that obviously to be drawn from this is that the emphasis that we can do is on education. So people will become more educated. They will have skills that are match the demand, because there is a huge demand. I know in California now it's a glutton of demand rather than people who can satisfy it. So, I mean, that is to me the only conclusion from all this data. And the question is, how do you do that? That is unclear.
So there's no question that we need to do a lot of, because there are apparently lots of jobs that are open and people without the skill to take them. So clearly we can do a better job on education. You have to think very carefully what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean MIT needs to produce more students. I went last year to the annual meeting of the American Association of Community Colleges. And I came back, it was about 11 o'clock at night. It was in New Orleans, I flew in, I flew back the same day. 11 o'clock at night, I had to go to my laptop and send email to my colleagues. You have no idea how privileged we are sitting at Rice University. You go to a whole different world of community colleges where the big thing is giving people the skills of soldering. Of al-khamot, soldering.
What are you saying?
That the issue is very often we need to think at what level do we need to improve education. Is it at the level of college, at the level of community college? But I don't disagree with you that dealing with education is a huge issue. We need to think carefully where do we need to emphasize. For example, we have been able to increase people who finish college to, as I said, about 35% right now. Should we try to take this higher? Or should we try to put more emphasis in the middle third, which are the middle skills, and try to improve these are the people who very often go to college, incur lots of debt, don't graduate, don't finish the 4-year degree, end up with lots of debt they can never pay back. So we need to take a very careful picture. What do we mean by improving education? Eli?
Historically, you omitted the influence of the 2 world wars in the 20th century. They had tremendous effect. And also the life expectancy, which grew. So how many years people are expected to work, to be employed?
So perversively, in a perverse way, the 2 world war actually improve income inequality because they destroy wealth. And the people who usually lose more are the rich people. So if you look at, if you read or browsed Piketty, he basically said that now we've had 70 years without a major war, and he attributed that to one of the issues why we see increasing inequality, because wars actually compress the inequality.
A topic that you described a bit less would be, and a question that I'd be asking would be the gap, the difference in the gap, and I'd say the worsening in the gap of the quality of living. I take, let's say, the smartphones, let's say, as a case of the gap between the best smartphones that the richest can afford and the smartphones that the poorest people can still afford to buy. So my question would be, how would there be a drop in the cost of living at a basic level that would, in effect, provide people that are earning minimal wage to still live at a basic level, even though they're receiving a lesser income?
So this gets into actually a very thorny issue. There is one variable that changes dramatically the picture, which is we look at what we call inflation, which is the consumer price index. And how do you compute the consumer price index? And over this, there are huge arguments because you have to define some basket of products to define it. And there are people who are claiming who are not measuring it correctly. We're not measuring the value of all the freebies that we're getting. And therefore, we are overestimating the inflation cost, so to speak. And if you take this into account, things change dramatically. And I have to say, I don't have expertise necessarily in how to do that. And I'm just using the standard CPI here that the economists have, after big fights and arguments. But this is what you're raising. The issue is exactly how do we measure cost of living? It's an incredibly important issue because changing inflation rate changes dramatically many of these numbers.
Are we seeing communities that are statistically less educated becoming more educated? Like, are we seeing statistically to be the general population become more educated because they are no longer able to have less skilled jobs?
So I would say generally, starting after World War II, there has been kind of emphasis to try to push more people to get college education. I said we've reached about 35% who gets a 4-year college degree. It's not clear that this is necessarily a response to diminishing opportunities. For example, if you do now polls among Republicans in the United States, you see a growing distrust in colleges. They think it's not worth it. And partly there's a whole, I mean, usually there's not one factor in this picture. There are many, many factors. We have the so-called student debt crisis. Student debt cumulative in the United States now is at $1.6 trillion. Everybody knows it will never be fully paid. Both parties are responsible, so all politicians just try to kick the can. Some now, and maybe Elizabeth Warren has proposed just forgiving all the debt, but that's a lot of money to forgive. And you see why it happened is actually, it's the road to hell paved with good intention. They made it too easy to get loans, and you get loans even if you went to study, you know, not to pick on anything like gender studies, and that doesn't necessarily lead to good jobs, and now you're stuck with the debt. And there's a whole tier of for-profit universities arose that take advantage of this so easy to get loans, and they provide usually education of low quality. Again, does not lead to a good job. So what you see is among the people who you think they will benefit the most from college, you actually see they're looking at the picture, they say it's not worth it. And so the picture is much more complicated. Yes, we have more people graduate from college, but it's not necessarily because they're saying, oh, you know, I've lost my job in manufacturing. If I were a software engineer, I would do so much better. I'm going to go to MIT and study computer science. It's not so simple.
We see them become more skilled, though? Like, do they see them become more skilled in general? Like,
I said we have generally seen college education kind of increasing. You know, we'll have to think. I mean, I don't think we can increase it more without taking a bigger picture of the whole system. And you have to remember, the United States does not have an educational system. You have 50 states. Every state has its own educational system. You know, we cannot talk about American educational system. It's a gross abstraction. Talk about the American educational system. Yeah, Eva.
So I guess I wanted to ask something similar. You had a lot of beautiful charts here for all kinds of things. How about the educational levels? Like, you know, how many people are below high school? How many 2 years of college, 4 years of college? I mean,
so
this is very relevant. And
it's very relevant, and I mentioned that, but yes, I mean, there is more data I could bring, but there is only so much I can show in 40 minutes. So roughly speaking, you have to think about it about one-third, one-third, one-third. One-third has a...
And you claim that's steady. It's not changing.
It has been, it has been, the percentage going, finishing high school has stabilized in the low 90s and does not seem to be increasing. And graduate from college has to be, so far it's about 35%, and it's hard to tell whether we are stable or will continue to grow. We can look at some European countries where they have reached higher level, maybe 50%, but it's always misleading because the demographic is different between different countries. So we can probably increase it, but again, you will have to take some maybe national policies that we just don't have in the United States. We don't have many national policies.
Not that any of those guys will win, but there are candidates who are proposing stuff like this.
So
I mean, I don't think those guys will win any more than the ones you're quoting, but well, there are proposals out there.
There are proposals along this line. So there was a National Academy Studies in 2017 that looked generally at the skill issue nationally. And it was a very sobering report because the conclusion was there's no global picture what skills are needed. There's no attempt to match the educational system to the skills that are needed. So it's just a lot of greedy algorithms. And as we heard in the talk, it does not necessarily lead to a globally optimal solution. So there are apparently lots of jobs that are open, but the employers cannot find the people with the skill for this job. So clearly we can do a better job just educating people. There's no debate about it. But the question is it just a matter of education, or do we need to think some other policies? For example, you know, we have recent, I'll give you an example, the recent tax reform that was passed by the Trump administration give preferential treatment for capital expenses. So if you're now a businessman, you say, should I invest in buying robots? Or I invest in retraining my workers? And you look at the tax law, and you see that one has actually better tax treatment than another one. So you are now incentivized to invest in capital, rather invest in human capital, which is not considered as capital expense. So the spectrum of policy we need to consider is broader, and it's easy for academics to say it's all about education, but education is only part of a bigger picture.
No, actually, I would have made the Shafi point here, which I wanted, like, is that, you know, many of us, I certainly included, I work in education, so, you know, I don't want to say that the world has to change and I can do whatever I used to do. We should change.
So I'll tell you where I think we need to change, in the most dramatic thing that we need to change. And it has to do with lifespan. And what you see is also, if you take this, the fact that, you know, you have more and more people who are in the 60s that are still quite healthy. And you look at the fact that the Social Security is running into a deficit very soon. And it's not too, I mean, in the UK, they already proposed to push retirement age to 75. So that means that, and you may want to think that the retirement age is, in fact, even now, Social Security says the full retirement age is 70. So that means that we have to start thinking about careers who are almost 50 years long. And we live in a world that's changing so fast that it's very hard to think that the model we have right now, the model is study, work, right? You go, you study K to 12, K to 16, for some of us K to 20 or whatever, but we study and then we work. And it's not clear that it still makes sense. So the big issue is lifelong learning, continuing education. And except that if you look at us as institutions, we are very much focused on our residential classes. And once people go out, well, it's hard for them, you know, they have a job usually, it's hard to study while they have a job. So I had a conversation, in fact, just last week with our Dean of Continuing Studies. And she said, maybe, you know, right now, continuing studies at Rice is mostly what we would say an outreach function. It's just to create good image. Mostly people who come to attending classes are retired people. But more and more, they say themselves in the business of not continuing education, professional education. And so from a school that's in some sense it's to the margin, it's moving more and more to the center of the academic school. But now the question is, should we have just one school of continuing/professional studies, or should the School of Engineering take it as part of its mission? So far we have not. Our focus is really on the residential class. But maybe we need to start thinking about lifelong learning and professional education. So I think we will see, even our own institution, I think we will see a huge change just because of a need to continue to educate people throughout their career. Okay, shall we declare victory?
Yes, okay, thank you.